Um,
We're rolling.
okay. I'm just going to start out with a general statement. Today is December 7th, 2010, and we're interviewing Mr. Bob Brostad at Buena Vista University. And Mr. Brostad is 90 years old, having been born on January 3rd, 1920. My name is Bill Feis, and along with Jared Gledhill, we'll be interviewing Mr. Brostad. Jerry Johnson is behind the camera. We'll start off with just a general question. What were you doing before the war, before you entered the service?
I was working in the post office and odd jobs other than that. And before I went in the war, I was working in a restaurant waiting to go. But I volunteered for the draft and was turned down. I was 4F. So I came home. Two of my best friends made it. There were 3 of us went down. 2 of them made it. One of them made it home. The other one was my cousin. He was killed in the invasion of France. And I kept trying to get in, and I wasn't making it, wasn't passing. And some friends came home from Chicago, and they'd enlisted. So they said, why don't you get released from the draft board and enlist? So I did. If you walk through the door, boy, they took you then. And so I got in. I enlisted in ordnance, 601st Ordnance. And we went to North Carolina for our training, Camp Sutton, and after that we went up to Camp McCoy in Wisconsin for a few weeks, and from there we went overseas. And can't remember the date. It was in December, probably the 11th, 12th, something like that. We had a rough ride over, a lot of sick guys who lost. The boat next to us, which was part of our guys, there was 2 of them lost. They buried them at sea. And we landed in Oran, Oran, North Africa. And it's kind of a pretty ride, the tail end of it. The first part wasn't very good, but went through the Straits of Gibraltar, which was very pretty at night. You could see Spain and Portugal and Africa. I can't think of the name of the city on the African side. Maybe you know, I don't remember. There's a movie picture of the city, but I can't remember the name of it. Landed in Oran, and I don't know. I was on guard duty first night, which wasn't much fun. We were sleeping in an apartment house that didn't have a roof on it or windows in it. It was just a frame building. And I was on guard duty the first night, out behind the brick pile. And all of a sudden there were shells going over, and I thought we didn't know where we were at, come in at night. And I thought we were at the front lines. These shells going over, I was scared. And but it so happened that the Arabs were trying to break into our depot. And they were just shooting over their heads, and it was going over me, and it scared me. So that's where I landed, and we were there for 2 years in Oran. But we were base ordnance, and we could fix anything the Army had. They could fix the small rifles and the large tanks or whatever they had that could be fixed if they could be fixed. If they couldn't, why, they were junk. And so from there we went to France. We were there 2 years and went to France. We went to Gray, France. That was close to Dijon, France. Not too far from the Swiss border. We spent a year there. And so I guess I don't have too much more to say. I had a good friend who was a friend of mine. I think he was the youngest lieutenant colonel at that time. I think he was 27 years old. He was in an engineer outfit. They built bridges to go across the rivers and so forth. It's interesting to see going across the Rhine River. That's quite a bridge. How they do it, I don't know. But when you build a bridge temporary that you can go over with tanks, it's pretty good. Coming back, we've got a ride with a general coming back. Let us ride with him back to Oran. Flew down the Mediterranean coming back. That was smooth. The going up was rough, going over the hills and mountains.
So you were 2 years in North Africa, and then you went to France,
Went
and
to
you were in
France.
southern France.
No, this is kind of the middle of
France.
We weren't too far from the Swiss border. A lot of the fellows got into Switzerland, but I didn't. But that was at Grey, France, and we weren't too far from Dijon. People might know where Dijon, France is.
I know where Dijon is.
That's where I found out where my cousin's husband was from, or where he was north of us. I can't remember the name of the place, but I found out where he was, and I got a friend, and we hitchhiked up there and got to see him and back, and he ended up to be married my cousin. He was the best man at my wedding. So, but then in France I ran into well, he wasn't my classmate. I was a freshman and he was a senior, but I was in an officers club. Not only got the mail, but I also took officers' clothes to the dry cleaners and brought them back, and that sort of did odd jobs that they needed. And I heard a fella talk, and I thought I knew that voice, and it sounded like Jim Friedland. His brother was in my class, and he had a deep bass voice, and he had his sunglasses on. He was in the Air Force, and I was just a corporal. Walked up to him and saluted, and I said, "Are you Jim Friedland?" And it was. And that's quite interesting, clear over in the middle of France. And talking about that, I met my best friend in Oran, North Africa. I was in the back of a command car, coming at an angle like this. My best friend in high school was coming at an angle like this in a 6x6, and he had his head out the window. And I happened to see him and recognize him, and I screamed at him, and he heard me, and he stopped, and we got to talk for about 10 minutes, and he had to go. They were bivouacked outside of Oran, and so I don't know much else, I guess.
The odds of that were...
I was in a kind of a bad accident, and going from Grey, France to Dijon to get the mail, and I was supposed to be driving, and the sergeant, we were going in after pay on the first of the year, 45, and the sergeant, he was quite a bit higher than I was. He was a tech sergeant, and I had the board officer, and he decided he was going to drive. So we had a wet snow, and you know what wet snow on blacktop does, it gets slippery. And over in France, you have your blacktop, then you have a ditch over here, and you have little ditches that go from here into the bigger ditches. I've never seen a road like that, but we got to spinning and hit that, tipped it over. We had a homemade wood cab on it, and the sergeant's clerk and I were in the back seat, and we were upside down. The sergeant was on his back holding the Jeep up. His clerk and I had our heads out the back, and the back of the Jeep was just above our necks. And he was holding it up until some soldiers come along and got it off of us. The officer was hurt pretty bad, but that's the worst accident I had in the service, I guess. But it was scary.
You were in France when Germany surrendered.
Yes.
Do you remember that day when you heard the news?
Yeah, I remember the day, yeah.
And
yeah.
Where were you?
Well, we were in France, and I was up to Germany, just, catching a ride around with guys that going someplace, but our outfit was never there. We weren't any farther than Grey, France. That's where we stayed.
Well, that's close enough.
We were based, and we were attached to the 7th Army, and we were attached to the French 1st Army. And so we had French in the same place we were. But the French, they had a big, I don't know how many ton records they have, but anyway, they had a big wrecker parked next to my mail truck. I had a truck, something like a pickup, like a plumber's pickup or electrician's. And they'd come out every morning about the same time I'd leave for Dijon, and they'd still be trying to start it there when I get back from town. We were 35 miles or 30 miles from Dijon, and they, I don't know if they ever did get a start. But
So,
we also had German prisoners and Italian prisoners with us, and come across from Africa with us, and the Germans were very clean, intelligent people, and they were nice guys. They would work, but Italians I had to do guard duty on the boat, and they'd get sick and they sit down below the same way, and they wouldn't get up, go to the restroom or go to the edge of the boat. And I remember one day it was hot, sun was shining, and I was about ready to get sick too, and so I just grabbed the one guy by the hair and pointed to the side of the boat to go over there and do his thing. But I don't know much else, I guess, to tell you.
did you? Do you remember, thinking about when Germany surrendered, did you know once that happened if you were going to be sent to the Pacific Theater?
Yeah, they were planning on that, yeah. We'd already been over there 3 years, and they were thinking about sending us to the Pacific, yeah.
Were you going to be doing the same thing in the
Yes.
Pacific, or would they have put you?
Well, I'm sure we would, yeah. Our outfit they called it the General Motors outfit, so most of our officers were General Motors dealers, car dealers, like Don Douglas here in Storm Lake was I think he was our C Company captain, and there's quite a bit of others. Our first battalion commander was the end coach for the University of Minnesota football team. He was our commander, and he was a good one. And of course, a football guy is going to be pretty good.
How did you feel then when you heard that Japan had surrendered? And
That was the one that was really good. We knew then we'd get to go home because we were worried about having to go that way, and so that was a pretty highlight that we knew we were going to get to go home.
Was there a lot of celebration when you heard? Or should I?
Well, they said they brought in a 6x6 load of wine or champagne, and I guess it was all gone for very long. So I guess we were glad to go home.
Probably good to be in France at that point, wasn't it?
So did you go? How long was it before you got to go home? When did you?
I don't remember that. I don't remember. We came home, and I got out of the service. I was going to bring my discharge papers. I forgot it, but I think it was about the 11th of December that I got out of 45. So
they shipped you back home, and you then. What did you do when you came home?
Look for something. Look for a job. I don't remember what I did. I guess at first I think I worked up at Arnold's Park. I got a job working up there, running. We had what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. We had 4 rides up at Arnold's Park, and went up there in the spring and we set them up, and that's where I worked the first year out of the service. Well, before I started that, I worked for the implement dealer who had a bunch of grain trucks, and I went around out in Nebraska and South Dakota and Minnesota just locating the corn, and the trucks come along and pick it up. That's what I did for quite a few months before. Finally ended up back in the post office again. The girl that took my job, I got back, and I ended up, I can't remember how many years I worked as clerk. I think it was 5 years as clerk, and then I became a rural mail carrier. I carried mail for 34 years, 5 years in the office. So then I retired, and I ended up down here now. So.
Well, for your service, what are you most proud of when you think of your service in the war, of what you did, or what are you most, when you
Well,
think
I
of
don't know
you think
what
of
I
with
was proud of myself, but as our outfit, we had a very good outfit. We had good mechanics, and we were, I mean, they were a pretty intelligent bunch of fellows. They were all, most all our mechanics were Chevrolet mechanics, and as I said, it was a General Motors, more or less a General Motors outfit. And they had a lot of good friends, intelligent friends. Some of the guys had awful good jobs. We had lawyers and doctors and so forth. So we had a good bunch.
And they obviously, the Army couldn't run without people who knew how to fix all that stuff too.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
They're very important.
Yeah, we had good men. Yeah. We had a lot of fellows from Waterloo that worked out there, and a lot from Detroit, Michigan. My best friend was from Grand Rapids. He was an auditor for City Service Oil Company. And so there's we had lawyers. We had one lawyer that died from homesickness, you might say. He wouldn't eat. And so, yeah, we had some good men. I was proud of them, and I think the government or the Army was too.
It sounds like a very interesting unit that they were able to collect together some real talent for the job that they needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, Don, I think I told you, Don Douglas he was a Chevrolet dealer. He was one of our captains. I had a lot of fellows from Storm Lake in our outfit. I don't know how many. It must have been probably 8, 10 from Storm Lake. I think there was 5 or 6 of us from little town of Lynn Grove in our outfit. So.
Do you remember anything like specific that you guys did, whether it be in in France or in North Africa? Anything like USO tour? Was there a USO tour that came through? Did you guys get
Any what?
The USO? Did you get to catch a USO tour come
USO came
Yeah.
through? Yeah, they did. Yeah, they had shows. Yeah, That was fun. Nice to have. They sing your old songs and so forth. Yeah.
Did you get to see Bob Hope?
I don't remember Bob Hope. No, there. No.
I know they had a lot of shows, so I
Yeah.
don't know if maybe he
Yeah.
came. What did you what did you do for your leisure time when you were? Did you get to go on leave at all in North Africa?
Well,
or
like I
in
said, I
France?
went up to. What did I say that city was?
You didn't get to go to Paris, right?
Yes, I was in
Did you?
Paris. Yeah, I
Oh.
was in the tower there, and
Are we allowed to ask you about
I
Paris?
ate up there on the Eiffel Tower, and I can tell you about getting on a train to go into Paris. I was telling you about Bob Peterson from Storm Lake. He was in high school. He's a grade behind me in school. He and his sister, and they're very smart. And I didn't like to study too well. If I didn't like to study, I'd say something about Roosevelt. They were Democrats, and my dad was Republican. They took care of my study hall. But anyway, going to Paris while we were getting on the train, and there's a bunch of these paratroopers there going on too, and the French take their ducks and their geese and everything and chickens on the train with them, and of course these paratroopers weren't on the train, so they were just throwing them out the window and out the doors, and they let us on. We got in with them. We decided we weren't going to argue with them. But we had a good time in Paris. Paris, a nice city. And
How many days did you spend there?
just a couple days, yeah.
What sorts of things were there restrictions on what you could do, or could you pretty much go anywhere?
Pretty much do what we wanted to. As far as I know, we did anyway. So. I went towards the end of the war. Well, after the war was over there, I rode with a friend of mine in a 6x6. They tried to units steal from each other, you know.
Oh,
You
yeah.
probably know that. And we had a lot of stuff that we stole along the way, and we had to get rid of. So you get rid of them to other units, and so I got around France quite a bit with that way. And what bothered me and amazed me is after the war, you'll drive along these valleys, just valleys full of tanks and half-tracks and jeeps and 6x6s, just laying there to rust out. They said it was cheaper to do that than it was to try to haul them home on boats. So, but that's an interesting thing. And I thought it was very interesting to see how they crossed the river up there, getting into Germany, Rhine River. That's really something to see a bridge made like that.
You were,
How they do it.
you were talking about the mail. What was one of like the most unique things that you saw somebody try and ship back from Germany? What was one of the most unique things that you saw somebody try and ship back from Germany?
Ship out?
Yep. Try and ship back home.
Oh, the soldiers did?
Yeah.
I never saw any of that. I don't know. We weren't up in Germany.
Or
It just,
I guess
oh,
in
guys
France.
were shipping guns and so forth, and you could ship a rifle home. And I know I shipped one home, and my cousin wanted it, so I gave it to him, and he made another. I don't know how they'd redo it, but
Was that against regulations, or you
well, you could do you could do it, but you had to have permission some way or another. I don't know how you did it, but some fellows got home with a lot of stuff. I don't know how they did that.
Any Jeeps? Any of your friends try and mail a Jeep back?
Not that I know of, no. Some of them have one. I know somebody here in Storm Lake had one. But I don't know if it come from over there. It probably came from the States. But he was in France. He was on the invasion in France. How they get him home, I don't know.
Those are questions that most people just don't ask, right?
I'd like to have one. As I was a mail carrier, I could have used one, but I ended up with a Jeep. I ended up with 2 Jeeps. They weren't Army Jeeps, though.
So they worked.
Pardon?
So they
Civilian
were?
Jeeps, yeah. I think I had 3 Jeeps. You could really plow a lot of snow with a Jeep.
So when you said that it sounds like you hopped a ride once in a while and you said you went into Germany or you saw the Rhine River. Did you do that? Just go with some people up there when you had...
Just catch a ride with some of the guys who are going up there, yeah. We had fellows that had to haul here and there and haul equipment and so forth. And I had friends that drove truck and hauled stuff here and there. So I got around quite a bit. I was in Germany and what's the other country up there? I can't even say the name of it. My memory isn't working.
Luxembourg, maybe? Or
Well,
Belgium?
next to Luxembourg.
Belgium?
Belgium. I was in Belgium and Germany, that's all. I should have gone to Switzerland. That's where I wanted to go, but I never got there. So that's a pretty country, I guess.
It's beautiful, yeah.
We weren't very far from there.
Was there anything else that you want to tell us? I mean, you have a very fascinating...
Oh,
line
I
of
can't
work you
think
were
of
in, things
anything.
you
It's sleeping in the mud and pup tents isn't much fun, and getting off a boat and climbing down those ropes into a small boat to land, something different. But it's a good education. I know the fellow that had my mail route before me, he said, I'm glad I went to service, but I wouldn't go again. That's the way I am. But been a lot smarter probably to stay in and got a pension out of it. But
Did you think about that at the time, or?
no, I was too happy to get home. But some fellows did, yeah. But it's interesting, I didn't tell this, when we first got over there, of course, there wasn't any mail. So I either had to be on guard duty, and I was in B Company when I first got over there, and then I was transferred to headquarters company. But they had me help them put together jeeps and 6x6s and so forth. They come in crates. Parts of them come in crates, and then you assemble them over there. That's what I did at first. And this lieutenant and I got along pretty well, and he wanted me to go back to my company and be with him. He'd give me a sergeant's rating right away. But I lived up in the officers' club. We lived in tennis court out in the Oran tennis court. That's where we lived, and that was pretty nice living. And I had my own vehicle, and that looked better to me than doing dirty work. So.
Well, I can understand that.
Well, it don't take long after you're in the service. You want to get.
Probably
And
still
another thing while we were there, I mean, if you got in trouble, they shipped you right up to infantry. So you wanted to behave. And I know a good friend of mine. He was his dad and the commanding officer, the end coach from the University of Minnesota, were good friends. And he got into trouble, and that didn't make any difference. He went up to the front. He came home, but so you learn to behave. And being a sergeant, I don't think you want to get in trouble anyway. You might be a private.
It's often how that works, isn't it?
Usually. I guess taking a step back to when you were up at Camp McCoy, Fort McCoy up in Wisconsin. Most of that place is still around. Any big memories or any good memories of being up there?
No, not really. I remember I got a headache. This wasn't Army stuff. I got a headache, but there's a kid in our unit that said he was a chiropractor. I'd been to chiropractors, so I thought, well, I'll go down to him. Well, by the time he got through with me and got back to my tent, the tent was going round and round. I had to crawl back to him, and he finally got me out of it, but I never went back again. But up at Camp McCoy, we didn't do much of anything, just sit there. And I probably shouldn't tell this, but one night we went out. My friend from Lynn Grove had his car up there, and we were going to a nightclub. And our first town, we were going to a bar, and we didn't like it there. So across into Minnesota, there was a nightclub, so we decided to go over there. And so we took off, and we passed a car. This kid had a DeSoto 2-door, and we passed this 4-door DeSoto, and all of a sudden he went around us. Then a siren went off. We thought we were hooked. That was back, what was the speed limit then, 50? I think that's what it was. And so we slowed down, but it was the guy that passed us they got, and they threw a bottle out, so they got picked up. But it was a funny thing because his best friend was, when we got to the dance hall, and wasn't there very long, and the kid that had the car, his best friend was with us, and what happened, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden Jack come over to me and he says, "We're going home." I thought that was kind of funny. We just got there, but I went to the car, got in the car and started to go. I said, where's Arlie?" "I don't know, and I don't care." We got to get back to the camp, and he was home, and how he got there ahead of us, I don't know. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't know what else to tell you.
Well, say if there's anything else that you know as you're thinking about it, if there's anything else that you
I can't think of
of
anything.
your training or any other experiences that
Well, we trained in Camp Sutton. They had us marching out, and I don't know what it was, a wheat field or what it was, dusty, terrible. And Camp McCoy, or not Camp McCoy, Camp Sutton, is in North Carolina, and it gets humid there at night. and you hang your clothes in the tent. They'd be wet in the morning. You'd have to put them underneath your blanket that you slept on. And well, I can tell you one story about coming home one night. I was out too late, coming in the back of the tent, coming in behind her too late at night, and so I was crawling in the tent to get in. You know, they had about a 10 or 12-inch board along the bottom of your tent there, and I got in, and the guys had got a cat and a dog, and we had our bug screens up, and they put them in my bed. Got them all tangled up. But I didn't think that was very nice of them. But you wouldn't do anything like that.
Oh,
I can
never.
tell that by looking at you.
Oh, no, never.
I'm not sure if I asked this or not. Did I ask you when you heard about Pearl Harbor, where you were and your reaction to?
Well, we all thought, well, that's where we were going to go. We didn't have any doubt in our mind that we were going to have to go over there too. So that was the story that was going around besides. So. And I don't know. They were just showing pictures of some of that on TV this morning. And it must have been terrible to see those big boats all burning up and sinking, and it looked like a big boo-boo to me. I don't know. Somebody was asleep.
When you heard about it, did you think that it would mean you would be going off to war?
Oh, we were sure of it, yeah. Yeah, there was talk of it, so. Yeah.
And then you had for the draft, and then you were 4F, and then you volunteered.
I enlisted and then I got in, yeah.
What made you decide the Army?
Pardon?
What made you decide the Army?
I have no idea. Everybody was going to the Army, I guess.
That works.
I know a lot of fellows joined the Navy. I have friends that joined the Navy. But I never thought that I'd like to be out in the middle of the ocean being shot at. Of course, we weren't shot at. We had some bombing in Oran, but well, I can tell you a story about Oran. We had some guys that had an apartment outside on the outer edge of Oran, and when I went out to pick them up, at a certain time they'd call me and come and get them. And I went out to get them, and on the way back we had an air raid. And of course, you shut off your lights and pull to the side of the road. And there was an area above them. Whenever they shot up the anti-aircraft at the airplanes, this guy was running this Arab, and one time when they started shooting, well, he just froze right there. he had one leg ahead and one leg behind, scared to death. But I always think of that poor guy. He was really scared.
I can understand that.
I can't tell.
Yeah. But we were pretty fortunate to not have much bombing.
Were you happy to make the move from Oran up to France?
France? Well, I don't know if we were happy. I guess you just take it as it comes. But
There's that.
but we were in. It rained a lot after we first landed, and we slept in pup tents and mud, and that's not much fun. But we liked it in France. Yeah. And Oran was a pretty nice city, really. There was a lot of bad parts of it, but there was about 4 or 5 of us that met a French family outside of Oran. We go out there just about every Sunday. They had a beautiful orchard, had grapefruit and oranges and stuff, and they'd feed us, and we'd take some food along too. And so we enjoyed Oran. Got hot there, but enjoyed it much.
Did you see many French civilians when you were in France? Did you interact with many French civilians?
Well, we were attached to French First Army, yeah. So we were, no, I don't know what you call it, where we lived was right with the French, yeah. But the French weren't very ambitious. The Italians were less ambitious, I thought, but I could see why the Italians were taken over pretty easy. Even France, I guess. I've been to France since back in '72. My wife's mother came from Ireland, so we took her back to Ireland, and then we went from there to England and over to France, and I wanted to see where my cousin's grave was. That's one thing that if you ever go to France, you want to see the graveyards over there. They're just beautiful. You can't believe how nice they are. And I was happy. I thought that these folks should have brought him home, but they wanted him buried over there. And my cousin is buried up to the front of the cemetery. There was a picture of the cemetery in the Des Moines Sunday Register. This was right after the war. And it showed his grave. And those stones, Italian marble, white marble, they're just beautiful. And they're just as perfect as can be. And they're kept, well, they were still kept nice when I was over there, so I suppose they're still kept nice.
This was your cousin. He was killed in action.
Yes, yeah. He was a lieutenant. He had a half-track. Well, they had a different name for it, but I thought it was a half-track. But they were being shot at, and he crawled underneath the half-track, and it got him underneath the half-track. His sister and husband had found some fellows that were in that outfit and got all the information, so they knew what happened. So.
Good. Well, we sure do thank you for taking the time to come.
Well, I hope you got all you wanted. I don't know.
We did and more.
Yeah.
It's very much we ask questions and just let you think about what you want to talk about, and it was fantastic. So we really appreciate it.
It's quite a thing to go across the ocean if you've never been across the ocean in a boat. We were on our boat had been a banana boat, and it wasn't much of a boat, but the storm we were in, the boat next to us, the railings on the boat were all washed off, and we were on D deck, but the C deck had water in it going back and forth, slushing back and forth. We were in quite a storm. It's kind of scary when you can't see the boat. They're pretty big boats. You can't see them next to you part of the time.
Yeah, you traveled the hard way. Nowadays, we hop in an airplane and we're there quickly.
Oh, yeah.
You had to buy
Yeah,
a
I
ship,
think we were
that's-
about 2 weeks going across. They had to go down and around, you know. They didn't just go straight across. So it's a life that you learn a lot, and it's nice to think about, but I wouldn't. You have to be tougher than I am to want to stay there.
What'd you do to?
You think you're tough when you go in, but it don't take long to find out you're not tough.
What'd you do to pass your time while you're on the boat?
On the boat?
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, this one friend of mine, he inherited a lot of money. This was back in the early 30s. He inherited, I think it was 20,000. So he was pretty wealthy at that time, and he blew it all. And he was in our outfit going over, so I was the guy that probably had the least money of anybody, and he'd come borrow money from me. And I'd lend him money, and he'd win it back, and then he'd come pay me back. And that's all he did all the way across. I said, why don't we just, I'll lend you the money, we'll keep track, and you pay me when you get back overseas. But that's the way he wanted to do, and he paid it all back. But most of the guys played cards, played poker. I wasn't a poker player. I learned that fast. And you learn one thing in the service, there's always somebody a lot smarter than you are. And the guys from the city, are the ones that are smarter. They're street smart, and I know a guy tried to teach me how to play a few cards, and I lost my money pretty fast.
Well, that was an education right there.
Yeah, it was an education. Yeah, blackjack was was the game. Yeah.
Well,
But I met a lot of good friends in the service. I had a lot of friends, nice people.
did you keep in contact with them after the war?
Used to, we had up until, it's been probably 20 years ago, more than that, I guess. We used to have a reunion every year, yeah. We had them down in Des Moines and Chicago and Wisconsin, Michigan, yeah. And it was a lot of fun, yeah. Yeah, our chaplain used to be there pretty much every time, and, yeah. But it got down to where, you know, I haven't had any Army friends for, I don't know how many years. They've all been dead. I was one of the younger ones. And so I think my one buck sergeant was, I think he was 40-something, 42 or something like that when I first went in. And he was in career. A lot of the fellows a lot older than I was. My best friend, I think, was 32 or 3. And, one sad thing that was sad was fellows got married before just after they got in the service or just before they did. And, you know, the wives left them, and that's hard on some of them guys. I know one friend of mine, he was just about broke him half, you know, he was sick. But he was a kid that I was telling you about, going out to these people in an Oran on Sundays, and we'd take pictures. They had a daughter who was 14, but she looked like she was 16, 17. Pretty girl. And he'd take pictures and send them home to his wife. We told him he shouldn't do that. I mean, there was nothing going on, but you know, they can think pretty fast, and it ended up in a divorce, and that's too bad. And my best friend, his wife had another fellow when he got home. And,
I heard that was fairly common.
that's the sad thing about the service if you're married. Of course, nowadays, I guess you can take your wife with you, can't you? Some places.
Some places.
Yeah. Of course, not where they're fighting, but
I think the enemy would be more worried about my wife than me.
in North Korea,
Depends.
Well, I think
what's going to happen with North Korea and South Korea?